Hello, welcome to Design Dialogues, a conversation from the Siebel Center for Design where we sit down with creative thinkers, boundary pushers, and human-centered design leaders to explore the ways design shapes our world and our future. I'm your host, Rachel Switzky, the director of the Siebel Center for Design. So in today's episode, Crafting Meaningful Experiences in Physical, Digital, and Shared Spaces, I'm joined by my old friend, Dav Rauch, a cross-disciplinary experience design leader whose work spans innovation consulting, immersive storytelling, organizational culture, and the design of digital and physical worlds alike. From designing Ironman's first heads-up display to shaping visitor journeys at the Museum of the Future in Dubai, Dav has spent his career blending imagination, systems thinking, and deep human connection. He's tackled challenges like reimagining autonomous spaceflight at IDEO, developing wearable tools for the blind, and launching a wellness brand rooted in rhythm therapy. Now, as a strategic innovation and culture consultant at the Exploratorium in San Francisco, Dav is leading a bold new initiative to craft immersive digital exhibits while transforming the internal culture of the institution. So join us for a rich conversation on the nature of vision, the value of friction, and why it truly means to design with empathy across time, space, and communities. So hi, Dav.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us today.
I'm honored.
So we're going to be using this as a catch-up because we haven't chatted in a while. But tell us a little bit about yourself.
That's always the hardest question for me. But I've worked in film, I've worked in product with you at IDEO, and now I'm still doing that, but I'm also starting to shift into more like culture design work. And I've got a lot of stupid ideas about what I'm going to do after this. But I think the common thread is that I help organizations pivot strategically via new offerings. And I say new offerings because it's a way to encompass all kinds of things. It could be an experience, or it could be a product, or it could be even something as intangible as culture. But I'm helping organizations shift gears and do something new. And I think at heart, I'm a creative, and so I always approach things from a creative perspective.
It's a good introduction to you. All right, so you've worked across so many formats: films, museums, medical tech, even space travel, as you mentioned in the intro. What do you see as the thread that ties all your work together?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it feels like all the same thing. To me, it's a creative challenge. And actually, I came up with this framework with my kid, fun and hard. And we decided that, like, if we are doing things, I was trying to coach him into, if you get to be the kind of person that does things that are both fun and hard, then you will live the good life. Because I feel like that's kind of what I've been doing. And really, fun and hard are the two ingredients of a game. And so I think, because if it's too easy, it's just kind of boring. Yeah. And if it's not fun, it's also boring. So anyway, I guess sort of like constructing a life that's like a game is fun.
Yeah, fun and challenging.
And challenging and rewarding too.
Yeah. So having it be fun and challenging is that's what draws you into these different formats and projects.
Yeah, and also, I think I probably have ADHD. Both my kids have it, and it seems like I do. And all the books I've read, I kind of relate to it. And I think that part of that for me is I love to be stimulated in lots of different ways, and I love to kind of shape shift and work with different things. I think if I had to do the same thing over and over, I'd get a little bit bored. But I am kind of doing the same thing over and over, which is really just kind of like a creative approach to problem solving. That's what design is.
Yeah, exactly. So what role does friction or disagreement play in your creative process?
Well, I think that the temptation is to think about friction and disagreement as something to be avoided and a sign that things are going bad or wrong. But actually it was from a project that I did at IDEO, actually for Microsoft, where we were studying teaming, because Microsoft had basically been empowering individuals with all of this suite of tools forever. And they were at this kind of shifting point where they're like, it's not about the the individual anymore. They're not the center of the universe. The team is. And so we helped them create a POV for what is teaming, what is a team, what is teaming, and how does it work? And one of the things that I think I'd always intuitively known, but actually got to empirically prove and with research and also articulate really clearly, was that the friction and the tension is actually the energy, and that is like the source of creativity and when new things start to happen. Now, friction and disagreement doesn't have to happen for all kinds of work, but I think especially when you're trying to create something new, when you're trying to be innovative, when you're trying to design, or when you're really involved in almost any creative endeavor, the tension is the raw energy that will either propel the team to new heights of like innovation and creativity, or just destroy the team and rip everything apart. And so it's just like, I think of the friction is a manifest of the raw energy, and when it starts to express itself, that's when you know you're on to something.
True, right.
And the question is, can you harness it, or are you going to be harnessed and like whipped out, like destroyed by it? What I've been, and that's actually part of, we'll answer this as we get a little bit further into the questions around my organizational work, but that's kind of been the heart of it.
Well, I'm gonna say, like, building on that, where it's either you're going along with it, or it like breaks everything apart.
Yeah.
Tell us about a project that didn't go as planned.
Oh yeah.
And then what did you learn from that?
Well, there was a project that I worked on with a team, and it was a very controversial project at IDEO, and all of us knew that we were kind of taking a big risk and kind of sticking our necks out a little bit to do this project, but we all had our own reasons for being interested in the project. And we felt like it was a big risk, big reward, potentially big reward, and also potentially big failure kind of type of project. And I remember in almost every project, there's always a moment where seems everything is awesome, and there's always a moment where like nothing is awesome and everything looks like it's gonna like crash and burn. And we were at that point in the project, and I remember we were in this really depressing. We were traveling. We were in this really depressing part of the city that we were in, and we were all just like, it was bad. And I remember it was actually the first project I ever led at IDEO, and I remember we stopped, and I'm like, let's get together. And I'm like, I want to hear why you want to do this project, and forget about what the client wants, forget about what IDEO wants, what do you want to get out of it, and why are you in it? And we all went around, and we all talked about the very selfish thing that we wanted to get out of this project. And what was really interesting, I don't know why I did that, but it just kind of occurred to me. And what was so interesting is that even though I asked them to be selfish, and they thought that they were trying to be selfish, all of the things that they wanted to get were actually not selfish at all. And I'm like, okay, we're going to do these things. We're going to try and do these things. We came out of that fired up. And mine was like a huge reach. It was super ambitious. And I thought there's not a chance I'm going to get my selfish wish. And by the end of the project, we all got our selfish wish. And what I learned in that was that being selfish, like if we just try to be selfish and focus, then it becomes personal, and we become invested, and then we work really, really hard.
It's like selfish together.
Yeah, and we did this little exercise, and we thought, well, what's going to be, like, what is the moment where you'll know that it was successful? And I remember, or what is the moment that's like most nerve-wracking? And if you get through that point, then you'll know that it's been successful. And we all decided it was all sharing, not the client or anything, it was sharing with our peers at IDEO this project, and we were all terrified that we might share a project that was just an utter failure, where not only did we fail the client, but we failed ourselves. And so I remember the moment where we shared back the project in front of everyone, and we got to talk about the selfish thing that we actually accomplished, was like really one of the best moments. And I got to tell you that by being selfish and actually following through and accomplishing our selfish goals, the client was super stoked.
I remember that project.
Yeah.
I remember it was awesome. So I did not know about this moment. So I think that's really interesting, because you're also talking about this like moment of crash and burn, where you're taking everything in from a creative process. and as we teach it here at Siebel Center for Design, it's really that most abstract part of the project where you're really trying to make sense of it. And I like how you framed it, and I think I'll steal that and apply that into the processes here and working with some teams. So let's talk about human topics that you work with. So you've tackled deeply human topics like pain, navigation, therapy, inclusion. How do you approach designing for emotional or sensory experiences?
Well, I think a really good experience is always an emotional one, and it's always about the human really at the center. And so I think that it's really important to actually literally explicitly design for things like inclusion and emotion and other really human needs like directly. And the fact that I've been able to do that has only made me a better designer, because ultimately oftentimes I think we think we're designing like a thing, right? It's like an inanimate thing, but this thing is going to be used by somebody. And so if we're not thinking about the emotion and the emotional relevance and all of the context and all of the experience around it, then we can't design it well. And so from my feeling is that like oscillating between designing things that don't really feel like a human at all and then actually getting the chance, I think any time I get the chance to actually design for those more core things in people, it's just a learning experience, and it makes me better all in everything that I design.
Yeah. So what's a space, a metaphorical or physical, that you haven't designed for yet but would love to?
Well,
what's on your wish list?
Yeah, so I've always had not always, but like space is definitely something that I would love to design for.
Like outer space.
Yeah, outer space, like going out into space. And I've been able to do a little bit of that, and I loved it, and it was a really fun project, and I'd love to do more. I'd also like to get more into the inner space of our own heads. I'm like really kind of fascinated by neuroscience, and in particular the way our brains connect to our bodies. Like I think I'm just super oriented around my body, and I think that oftentimes it's too easy to disconnect those. So I want to work on that. And then another thing that I've been really geeking out on ever since January, the fires in California, is I'm just like super diving into. I want to design a way to build a house that is climate hardened, that can't burn down, that can't wash away, that can be built by ideally by somebody, and using materials that are local and cheap. I grew up in Southern California, and so I've been designing adobe structures in my mind since I was a kid. And I never studied architecture, but my hypothesis is that maybe AI can do the kind of hard design part of it, and I can bring my experience designing in general and design a new kind of house that is climate hardened and for the future.
That'd be interesting from an AI perspective, because you don't have the architecture training, but can an AI help you with more of the
it knows all the rules.
Yeah, the rules and standards. Yeah. You can just kind of give it some of the things that you're thinking about and tool from there. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and I want to create systems where because I think there's already a lot of computer programs that can figure out like wood and how much strength it has and how many you need. But like, what about mud and Adobe and other things that are more natural? Like, I would love to get those wrapped into the types of materials that computers can also help design with.
Yeah, and expand us as designers as well. Yeah. If like we don't have this specific training in one area, can we then expand upon it based on what we don't know, but we still have the creative thoughts and the inspiration around it. Yeah. And I like we were talking before, just that you're thinking about the context of like fires and floods, and in this context of like tornadoes and high winds, and like if there's, and I'm sure people are thinking about this. But do they need other kind of like provocations and other types of thinkers in this type of space? Yeah,
a roofless home, which.
A roofless home.
Yeah, so like domes can be great for that, and you know what I mean, and they're cheaper, and the wind can't rip them up and stuff like that. But and it also works for fire too. Yeah. Anyway, this is stuff that I've been diving deep on.
We should have a whole other podcast about that.
Sure.
So, all right. So, what do you think the practice of human-centered design needs to evolve as technology becomes more embedded and invisible? Speaking of AI.
Yeah. Well, I think that human-centered. I feel like human-centered design kind of had its moment. And so like I just feel like it's got to kind of like hold its own and stay strong and stay relevant. And so I think, because I think it's easy to kind of be fad oriented, but there's nothing faddish about being a human. And like that's not going away, I hope. But actually it kind of is a little bit, or it's changing. I mean, I think what's exciting for me about AI and really all kinds of technology is that I've always worked closely with technologists and people and I've always worked with technology myself. I personally don't give a shit about technology. I actually really don't, and I never have. And I think that that's what makes me valuable working with people that really do care, is because they need that tension, that creative tension around like, I don't care and you care about it, so what are we going to do about it? How are we going to negotiate that? But I do care about technology in the sense that I think technology has always helped us understand more deeply what it means to be human. When we thought being human and working was all about like, being a farmer or working in a factory or whatever, and then we shifted into, and then technology kind of took those over, and then we moved into offices, and now there's this really big technological transformation that's going to take place with AI, and I think that it's going to really help us to like dive deep into what it means to be human. And I'm personally excited about that because you don't have to look at, like, all of human history is just relearning at a deeper and deeper level what it means to be human. And I'm absolutely certain that there is way more depth than that we can go, and we just got to go there. It's like, it's the next frontier.
And how we adapt and change with the new technology, and what does that then elevate or dial up or dial down some of the things that we do as humans? I mean, this is the responsibility we have as human-centered designers, is to pay attention to these things and see how these types of things evolve.
And there's going to be things that will emerge that we could have never thought. And that's it's the exciting thing to me.
What emerges that we didn't expect based on this new technology that we don't really know about yet. So, okay, switching gears. So can you tell us more about your work redesigning Jewish rituals, and what that taught you about tradition and innovation, talking about things that hasn't changed over thousands of years.
Well, that was a really fun project. I mean, I'm Jewish, and I grew up in a Jewish tradition, well, kind of a mixed tradition, but, and that project came to IDEO in kind of a funny way, and it was part of our chief creative officer, Paul. Like, he was just really like, where can we go next? And it kind of just fell into our lap, and it was an amazing project to work on. I mean, really, like, designing spaceships and designing products and designing films and designing Jewish rituals it's kind of, like I said earlier, it's kind of all the same thing. You know what I mean? And I think that, like, what's fascinating about it is, like, we created a bunch of products, basically, that were based on ancient Jewish rituals. And one of the things that I realized is, like, Shabbat was always something that, like, it didn't totally make sense to me. And Jews get, like, really kind of, like, fastidious and a little bit like obsessive about, like, turn off all the lights and blow out the candles, and you can't do any work, and you can't pick up a phone and all this stuff. And I think, and what was so interesting is that here was this ritual, Shabbat, that's thousands of years old, and it was somehow created thousands of years ago so that today it would be here, and it would be deeply embedded and rooted right when we really need it. Like, right now, we need more than ever to turn stuff off and just be together and talk and not have all the... And so we kind of just, like, packaged it up and then really tried to share it with everyone else, all the Gentiles and everyone else in the world who needs it as desperately as, like, everybody needs that. And so I think what was really fascinating about it is the prescience and also the relevance of it, and how and also how Judaism and those rituals are both really rigid and kind of, like, really stable throughout time, and totally plastic, and at the same time. And so it was just a really fascinating, I've never designed with something so old made it feel so new and so relevant, and so it was a gift.
Yeah, I think I wasn't on that project at IDEO, but I thought it was a very interesting project for IDEO to tackle, and just as a Jew myself, every year going through the high holidays and Passover and other types of rituals that make up your religion or make up who you are and how you've been brought up, however you might take it. It's always just this reflection of, like why do these exist and how did this exist? And thinking about the years and years and years of these rituals that had been just embedded into a culture it was always so. It's every year it comes up. You're like, oh wow, this is like these things that have been happening for so long, and I love the kind of persistence of it as well, and that it's also something that can be. You can still evolve the practice, but keep the essence of the ritual. Which, again, as a designer, when you think about these, what's sacred, what's not sacred, what can you mess with, what needs to stay the same. I don't know. I always love those like drum beats of just reminders and reflections about those types of rituals that are built into our lives.
Yeah, it was almost like a superficial resurfacing or whatever that just helps remind us how relevant it is, And I think it's like always drawing it closer, but like drawing it closer to us right now is the thing, because everybody now and everybody throughout time has a slightly different relationship to it. So it's just kind of like clarifying that relationship and then pulling that string a little bit closer.
Yeah, I mean, just thinking about we had to recently redesign our Seder plate. Or had an opportunity in which to redesign the Seder plate, and not the physical plate, but I have relatives who are now vegan, and we were thinking about what's the interpretation of some of these very non-vegan type of traditional representations of Passover. That can we be thinking about this from another angle of non-vegan or of non kind of meats, or thinking about this like it was just interesting thinking about what would be the other, like not an egg, what would be another example of an egg. And it was just interesting.
Well, it's also you're paying attention to something. It's like you're kind of seeing anew something that you've seen over and over and over and never really looked at it.
Right, exactly.
And then you have to ask yourself, like, what's the core of it? You know what I mean? Like, why the shank? Like, what does that? What's the herb? Why? And so I think that it's asking those questions, and that's the beauty of it.
And they're so symbolic, and I don't know. I just thought it was an interesting exercise, and I was like, this is just a different lens in which to look at this. And it's always just like, oh, here's the Seder plate, but now we can be rethinking it, but still keeping the essence of the rituals. So I don't know, fascinating stuff. All right, really switching gears here. So you've been part of iconic stories like Ironman and Avatar. How do you see the relationship between storytelling and design?
Well, I'm actually going to steal the words of a really great friend, Livia Vagalos, who's an experienced designer who I was just talking to this week about this conference tomorrow, because I was looking for inspiration. And she was talking about education, which is what she does. And she said, education is change. I mean, like, if you're educating and not change, if you're getting educated, you can't get educated without changing. Like, that's the whole point, like transformation, right? So she said, education is change and change is story. And it was interesting because I talked to a handful of a gaggle of experienced designers, like, in our process that we always do. And I felt like, coming to IDEO and having worked in film, I was kind of I felt like I was the pimp who was pushing story and character and empathy and stuff always, right? Because that was what was special to me, and that's where I was coming from. And I decided in these conversations I wasn't because I felt like that was an obvious place to go, and I didn't want to go there because I didn't want to like put words in anybody's mouth. And to a person, every single person mentioned it. And I don't know, maybe I'm just like, they're just smelling me and they're like mentioning it or something like that. But like, I just loved what you said, because design equals change equals story, because stories are always about change. I mean, really, they're a chance to learn and to see something different and to change and hopefully emerge changed because of it. And so, I think that's why they all, like, I think someone looking at my portfolio or something is going to see like a film, and then like a medical device, and then like a spaceship, and then like a Jewish ritual, and then like a game with a corporate group or whatever, and they're like, what is all this stuff? And to me, it's kind of like all the same thing. It's all about change, really, like at the heart of it, change into what, and into something new.
Right.
That's my take on it. So totally. It's the same thing, totally connected.
Yeah. So what questions are you asking yourself most these days as a designer, a leader, and a human?
Well, more as the human, I'm asking myself what I want to be when I grow up. Believe it or not, I feel like I've been asking myself this question my entire life, and I feel like that's, like I was just saying, design equals change equals story, and all three of those things are very important to me. And so I guess it's not surprising that I'm asking that same question over and over again, because I have kind of changed over and over. I've changed and I've stayed the same. But that's the question that I'm asking. And I have a couple ideas for what I might be when I grow up, like, this year or next year. And then I have some kind of far out ideas for what might happen after that. And so that's the question I'm asking. What am I going to be when I grow up? So, yeah.
And when do you grow up? When do you know that you've grown up, Dav?
I always
what does that look like?
Well, I mean, like, I look in the mirror and I'm like, well, I'm all grown up, but like, I've always felt like I don't feel like a man. Like, it's so funny. Like, it's just kind of a trip. I feel like a little kid, and I feel like I'm kind of frozen in time at like 14 years old or something. I don't know, 8 years old. I don't know, something like that. So I don't think I'll ever grow up. No.
It's always like when am I like reach my pinnacle? Like, it's like there's so much more to do. There's so many more lives to be lived. You know, it's like it's that challenge, the hard fun challenges that are still out there.
Yeah, when I'm struck down, I guess is when that's when I'm finally grown up.
All right, let's talk about some of the current work that you're doing. So what have you learned about internal organizational change through your culture work at the San Francisco Exploratorium, which is a science museum for those who are unaware?
So I think I've had a journey and a path that's similar to actually something that happened at IDEO. And it was one that kind of came, that really surprised me, and I'm kind of still surprised that I'm doing this. But at IDEO, it was always like, there was work that was a little bit closer in, that was a little bit more incremental that we were doing at IDEO, and then there was work that was like not so incremental. And because I came from a science fiction and thinking about stuff like 5, 10, 20, 50 years off in the future, that was my comfort zone, and so I've always been doing that. The thing is that, and so I've been making kind of new experiences and helping organizations pivot. And when they pivot, they're pivoting into something new and something that they've never done before. And I think what IDEO learned before me, and then I kind of caught up, is that when you help organizations by designing something like net new for them, it's kind of like giving like them a new baby, or like a baby giraffe, like something that they just don't know how to care for, right? Because it's a new offering, and oftentimes these offerings require new capabilities, new talents, new skills, new resources, new support, and oftentimes, like kind of more invisibly, a new culture. Like the company has to change, and the people in their mindsets have to change within the company. And I think, and IDEO created, while I was there, the Design for Change Studio, which is all about helping both like on the kind of external offering, but then also the back end or the kind of internal, that support that's necessary to nurture that new thing. And I just, actually, my wife is she does talent, and then her work wife does organizational design, and this woman Andrea that my wife worked with for like 15 years or something like that. I've known her for 20 years, ever since our kids were born. We actually started working together, kind of weirdly, and I found that it's really super interesting. And the Exploratorium is a great example of that, because I came to the Exploratorium designing a new offering for them, which is like helping them to redesign their exhibits to be more immersive. So I started there, and then now I'm doing almost purely cultural work with them. They're kind of shifting their whole organization, and they're shifting what they're offering, but they're also, and there's all these cultural things that's exposing all these ways in which the culture needs to also evolve and shift. And so I'm helping them do that, and it's fascinating to me, and I would have never thought.
I was about to say, would you ever thought that you'd be doing that?
No,
because I would never have thought, and I'm kind of shocked that that's what you're doing. But yeah, that's awesome.
Okay, so but the way that I'm doing it,
shocked in a good way. Shocked in a good way.
But this will maybe make it make sense, a little bit more sense to you. So my particular angle on it is that I use story and play.
Of course, yeah. There you go. There you go.
To help,
that sounds like you.
To help groups of people break through things that normally would have stopped them, because basically story and play are two great techniques for getting people to kind of really think differently and to change more quickly. Yeah. And I feel like I'm kind of tricking them into breaking through barriers that they would otherwise kind of run into. And tricking sounds like a bad thing, but it's actually a really good thing, because it's sort of like a little bit of a Jedi mind trick, and then that helps to. But anyway, it's super fascinating, and it's something that I just would have never imagined. Yeah. But and now I'm working with Andrea, and we're partnering. Now we're working with the McKnight Foundation and other organizations, and what's fun is that she's been doing this for so long, and she knows everyone, and she knows she got all the playbooks, and she'll kind of throw a question at me I got this challenge with this organization, and they're kind of hitting the edge of what, and I don't quite know, and I'm like, well, here's how I would approach it. And she's like, that's interesting. You want to develop that into a thing? And so I'm actually just working on something with her right now that's super fascinating, and it's all about character. And so I'm bringing all of this kind of disparate, weird experience to a whole new area of design, and
that's awesome.
It's super fun.
I mean, this is I would never have imagined you in the Design for Change studio, but I love this for you. I think it's really, really cool, and I think this organizational change it needs these different types of perspectives. It's the same thing. It's just it feels more buttoned up as a bit of a culture itself.
It is.
And bringing a bit of your perspective into this, I'm I'd love to see more details. I think it's.
I'm happy to share that.
Yeah. Let's see. So you're talking about these immersive digital exhibits that you've been doing at Exploratorium. How do you approach designing immersive digital exhibits in a way that still feels human and interactive?
Well, I think, one provocation that I think is a really good one is to just say, one provocation to try to do it without any tech at all. Because I think tech is just something, I feel like we're becoming more and more tech skeptical. And I think as a culture, for very good reason. The one thing that all politicians from both sides can agree on is that there should be no phones in schools. It is wildly popular, and it is just spreading across the country. And why are people doing that? Because they want to protect their kids from the things that they know are dangerous. And technology is one of those things. And so I think that it's a great, design loves constraint. That's an old saying. And so taking a really kind of big, bold, hard constraint, which is take the technology out and see what happens, and then add it back in only as needed. So it's just the minimum viable technology, I think, is one thing. And then the other thing is I think that we've been, for these kinds of experiences, I think we've been way over-indexing on, I would say, the center of our eyes and the tips of our fingers. Because these are we have the most nerve endings and the most attention to the center of our eyes and the tips of our fingers, because we're human. Except we've got this whole body that's got is well equipped with all of these amazing attributes and senses and ways in. And I think that if we just start to pay a little bit more attention to our bodies, and think about what other ways in, how can we connect into our heart and our mind and our soul and our body and each other. That's my big provocation is what are some other ways in? And so that's how I like to design.
Yeah, no, it's a really defining immersive. What does that look and feel like with all the different senses, and not just say, see, touch, what else could it be? So have they launched any of your work at the Exploratorium? Of these new types of immersive, experiences?
No, they're working on it. It was really what we were doing is creating a roadmap and kind of almost like a strategy and like a big vision for what these types of experiences might be. And I remember when I started working with him, I'm like, why am I doing this? You guys have been doing this for like 20 years. Like, this is kind of a silly project. But there was like shockingly a lot of internal resistance just because of, well, they have deep in their DNA is this pedagogy, which is direct experience with the phenomenon. Yeah. And so anything that feels immersive and digital feels like not a non-direct experience of the phenomenon, and also mediated and kind of like nudging in a certain direction. They don't like to nudge anybody. They want you to learn whatever you're going to learn. And they have, it's like, just give you the experience and see what happens. And so, and that works great for things like gravity and things that we can feel and see and do at the scale of a human. But when you get to the really tiny scale or the really big scale or the really fast scale or the really slow scale or the really dangerous scale, that's when these types of experiences kind of break down. Yeah. And so actually this is part of the reason that I carried on with them in this cultural way is I realized that I was going to utterly fail at this job. I thought, this is a stupid thing. You're already doing it and you're hiring me to do it. And I'm like, oh, I can see this is a trick. The reason that they're having a hard time with this is because of some kind of internal cultural reasons that are deep, deep in their pedagogy, like old. And so I interviewed a bunch of people and like really tried to understand the history of the organization and also their mindset and their DNA and how they approach things and see things and their philosophies and their conflicting philosophies over time. And I developed a theory of change, like how does change happen at the Exploratorium? And so I kicked things off with like, look at all the times that you've changed, and here's the patterns, and here's how you actually did it in all of these times. We're at a moment where you got to change.
Awesome.
And if you think that you don't know how to change or you can't change, not true, because you changed like hundreds of times already. And so let's take this spirit of change and this process of change that you all have already done and you've invented, and now let's apply it to this new thing. And so that's where the kind of organizational stuff and the culture stuff really intersect in a way that like unlocks the tangible part of it.
It sounds like we have the parallel paths, because what you're describing feels like a lot of the journey that I've been doing within the university system.
Oh wow!
As well.
Yes,
which
this is
makes sense because
change,
it feels it's a big change, and also the research aspects and the kind of the deep entrenched ways that people have been doing things. So. Yeah,
we've been totally on parallel paths.
We've been on parallel paths. We have more to talk about this. So, all right. So you have been working with collaborators like Mark Rober and Anatola Araba. And so if you could talk about who they are and like what it's been like working with them.
Yeah. So we worked just a little bit with them, but like what we wanted to do is like we wanted to bring a big burst of inspiration and energy to the Exploratorium, and to kind of like bust them out of the way that they've been thinking, because they were kind of like trapped in their kind of like their Exploratorium way of thinking. And so we're like, we just got to surround these people with like people that think really differently, that are really inspiring and really smart and amazing, and just kind of blow their minds a little bit. So we asked Mark Rober, who is like this amazing YouTuber and one of the most successful YouTubers I think of all time, and he came in for almost no money, and because he just loves the Exploratorium. And he, I have to say, is as cool in real life, and even cooler in real life, and just totally humble. He was just a joy to work with. And same with Anatola. Anatola is like a rising star. She's very young, she's a futurist, and she's just kind of like going all over the place with wild ideas. And so it was exactly what we expected and were hoping for, which is just like a real breath of fresh air from people who are really generous and humble and wicked smart and full of energy and creativity. And it really totally transformed. It totally worked.
Yeah, it's good to bring in like some of these like doses. I mean, that's why we're bringing you in to speak at this Immerse Symposium tomorrow. It's just like bringing in this like dose of inspiration. I just did this on the weekends, talking to a bunch of ambassadors and just giving them a dose of new ways to think about things. And we just have to kind of spread the love of what it means to do that.
You gotta change. Design equals change equals story.
Yeah.
equals fun equals hard.
Right.
Yeah, and Sounds good.
There's the themes here.
Yeah.
All right. So your a lot of your projects and the things we did at IDEO, they involved ambiguous, future-oriented challenges. So what's your process for designing in that kind of uncertainty when it's so ambiguous? How do you do that?
Well, I have a little process that I developed. Well, so when I first started working in film, I had come from more of interactive computer-y kind of thing. And I remember it was my first job working in film, and I had no idea what I was doing. And I remember I would get these projects where they would say, hey, can you design this sequence for us? And I was like, sure. Send the script or send the cut, and I'll look at it. And so I know what I'm designing for. And they're like, okay, we can't do that because it's top secret and it's Hollywood and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, I can't design if I don't know what the story is and whatever. And they're like, do you want the job or not? and I was all alone. I was the only creative. It was a very small company, and I was the only kind of creative one doing what I was doing. And I tried to have a brainstorming session. That wasn't happening. And so I literally just started walking. And I'm like, well, if they're not going to give me the story, I'm just going to make one up myself. And this became my process. So I'd take these long walks, and I would walk until I had the idea, and then I would come back. And basically what I would do is I would start with a character. And because I would have a line or two, in a world where blah, 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 you know what I mean? And I'd be like, okay, well, I'm in that world, and here's the person, and okay, and so I just start asking them questions in my mind.
Yeah.
And so I'd be maybe walking on the street, and I'd see a car go by, and I'd be like, so what are you doing? They're like, I'm driving a car. I'm like, oh, where are you going? And then, or what kind of car are you driving? And I would see a Mini Cooper, and I'd be like, oh, they're driving a Mini Cooper. And then I'd say, where are you going? And I'd be like, and I'm answering the questions myself, and I'm like, shit, I don't know where they're going. I don't know where I'm going, anywhere but here. And then they're like, oh, interesting. Well, it sounds like something's going on. Yeah, I'm pissed off. And so then I would just have I was a little bit crazy, and I would just have these little conversations in my mind and just slowly build up these characters over time in my mind as I was walking, just by asking them questions. And basically what I was doing is I was doing world building. But the thing about world building is it can go on infinitely and forever. And all I was doing was trying to get enough of a story so that I could actually start designing it, because I didn't get one from the director. And so I had to figure out, at what point could I stop asking world building and stop asking these questions and start actually designing stuff, because that was really the point. And so I needed the minimum amount of story and character so that I could start designing. And I came up with this test, and the test was, when I asked a question of a character and the answer that I got back from them surprised me, that's when I knew that I could turn around and start walking back. And it's not like I would stop asking them questions. I could still ask them questions. But now, the thing is, when I got an answer back that was surprising to me, even though it was all in my own head, I know that sounds a little bit weird, but the thing is that I realized that the character was writing themselves, and I was no longer writing them. And I just want to say that I am not a writer, and I am not special in that way. I think this is something that everybody has in them, because all humans have a deep affinity with story, and we're just hardwired into our bones and into the very cockles of our being. And so I would do that, and basically that worked. Sometimes I'd start walking at 11 o'clock at night, and I wouldn't get home until 2 or 3 in the morning. But when I got home in the morning, I had my thing, and I could actually start working, and the next day continue to work. And so when I'm in an ambiguous place, that's actually my technique, is I just start inventing a world in my mind. And then when it starts inventing itself, then I'm like, okay, now I'm ready.
Yeah, you have to grab onto something. Something has to.
Yeah.
I know, we teach a lot here about just design thinking tools and all these frameworks, and it's something has to give you structure in which to then design within. The design likes constraints. But if you're just given, again, the ambiguity where it's just it's just fluff, and we don't really know where to begin and where to end. I think that your idea of that world building, and I would never call it the way that I designed that, but I totally relate to the way you're describing it, where it's all of a sudden you're just I always feel like I have to embody and feel myself in the space even, and be a character as well, so that I can kind of imagine and see what are the kind of the needs of whatever we're designing for. And so I think the world building is quite fascinating. Do you ever see yourself as a character in the world building, or are you just designing the characters?
That's interesting. No, I'm usually building other characters, but that's the nature of a story, is that by being empathetic with other characters, we get into their world, and then we can see it from their perspective.
Right.
And the interesting thing about it is that it can be totally random. Like that thing that I was talking about, the car thing, that actually happened, and I designed that, and I showed it to the director, and they loved it. And it was all based on stuff that was randomly happening around me. It was not, there wasn't an intention. And I remember actually one of the things that I learned while I was at IDEO is like, we design our research like really intentionally. We put a lot of work into it and a lot of intention. We're like, what's the right person to talk to, and what's the interesting analogous experience, and all that stuff. And then one of the things that I realized is that, like, a friend of mine from IDEO used to call it, I'm putting on my design chakras. And basically it's like, it kind of like in the end, because we'd be like, oh no, that interview fell through and that analogous experience thing fell through, and now we're screwed, and now we're not going to be able to do this project. And what I learned is that, like, you know what, actually, the important thing is that you put the intention into it, and you're off in a direction, and that gives you the direction to head in, and it even doesn't matter what direction it is. It can be totally random. But just that intention of like trying to get to the heart of it is what's critical. And wherever you end up is the right place to be.
Yeah,
even if it feels totally random, and even if it is totally random.
Yeah, but it just gives you the space to think and focus. And I always pose the question. I mean, I pose it here as well, but IDEO, I'd be like, what do we wish for? Because just even getting it out into the atmosphere to be thinking about, and then just it gets your something about that framing again. It gets your like creative juices flowing, or you start seeing things in a different way. Just because you've said something.
And put a stake in the ground and started to move in a direction. That's all you need to do. And then you stumble upon the thing that you didn't know you were looking for.
Yeah, you just have to go for it, as opposed to you can't spin or be like, oh, I didn't get enough data, or whatever it might be. And just you have to kind of use a bit of your intuition as you build it, but then also you kind of just have to go with the flow with what you can.
You got to take a step, And the thing about ambiguity is that, like, kind of like in true ambiguity, it's like almost any answer is correct, as correct as any other.
That's right, exactly.
And so it's kind of like you can kind of just move in any direction, and that's sort of the little secret. You know what I mean?
Yeah, having that courage just to do it, or just
moving.
Yeah. All right. So last question I have here. And then we can take questions from the audience, our audience members here. How do you decide where do you go next in your career? Like what pulls you toward a project or an organization?
Yeah, I was listening to this podcast. I think it was Adam Grant, and he was talking to, I think, Mark Cuban, and he said in the sort of trailer notes to the show coming up that Mark Cuban's going to talk about why you shouldn't follow your passions. And I'm like, shouldn't follow your passion? What? I feel like I've built my whole life on following my passion. And his guest, Mark Cuban, I believe, was saying, he said, if I followed my passion, I would have tried to be an NBA basketball player, and I would have failed miserably. He said, instead, I follow my effort. And I was like, follow your effort? That's so interesting. And what do you mean by that? And I think it's, to me, what I've taken it to mean is like, what are the things that, there's a couple questions that I can ask or that I can tell people. It's like, what are the things that just feel effortless? Or another question is like, what do you do when you're procrastinating? Or what do you think about when you're procrastinating? Or what do you work on when you're procrastinating, the real thing? Because those are the effort. That's where the effort is effortless. There's like, my effort is easy. And then another question is like, when I'm walking or when I'm laying in bed or when I can think whatever I want and I don't have to worry about kids or work or blah, 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 when I'm cooking and I'm just in the zone, what do I think about when I can think about anything? And there's been something, and when I ask that question instead of what am I passionate about, because passion is like, it feels like there's a lot of pressure, you know what I mean? Like, what is your passion? What is the thing that you really want to do? And it's like, shit, I don't know. That's like it's like a big question. It's like, what do I want to be when I grow up? Like, what's the meaning of life? But instead, like, what are you thinking about right now? What's fun to think about? Or what feels effortless to you? Like, that's kind of an easier question to answer. And so, like, I've had some tricky ones, like trees I remember I kept thinking about trees all the time. And I'm like, what? And then, and anyway, like, there's things that pop up for me that are surprising. And it's like this also this work that I'm doing with like culture and stuff. It's like that's totally surprising, but really it's a result of kind of following my effort because it was easy and it was fun and I was like already thinking about it and it kind of just was working. And so I think that like that's one way that I decide is I've just gotten really good at paying attention. I've been really trying to become more and more aware of what is effortless to me and what is fun for me to think about and what I naturally obsess on. And it's different. It definitely, they overlaps with passion. With my passions, it's like a Venn diagram, but like, it's also distinct. And sometimes it's distinct in ways that are like really mysterious. Like, why is this so easy and why do I keep thinking about this? And it's like kind of trying to crack that nut and it takes a while.
Yeah.
And so anyway,
it's like drawing you just like, what is it? And unpacking it a bit about like, why do I see myself as a character in that world?
Yeah.
It's like
and why is this interesting?
Yeah.
Like,
why would it be interesting? Why does that draw me? Yeah.
Yeah. Is it the aesthetics of it, or is it the challenge, or the logic, or the people that are associated with it? Like, what is it that's
it's complicated.
interesting? And so I just like it's all about like paying attention for me, and then and then that makes it easy because like if it's effortless, it's easy.
Yeah. Dav, this has been awesome. Wonderful to catch up with you. I'm so excited that you're on campus for a couple days. So thank you. These guys, if you guys have any questions.
Oh.
You can get them all
Yeah, we'll record it, and I can repeat it.
It's our studio audience.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Pavitra. I just came here because I'm interested in human-centered design. I was at UX Days like last week.
Yay.
And then I wanted to like just hear more about like what that field is like, what like things you do. So I was wondering if maybe like first I just want to ask like what would be like a typical project that you would do? Like what is something that you've like created, and then you really enjoy?
There is.
Let me answer the question. So what would a typical project? What would a typical project be for you? I wonder if there is a typical project.
That's the thing. It's like,
but what would be when we're talking about that draw and like that energy and what would be desirable as a typical project, or how have you found yourself in these projects?
Well, there is no typical project for me in particular, and that's not true for other people. And it makes my life kind of more interesting, but it's harder sometimes. But I think to me, I feel like one of the things that I learned at IDEO is that, and I taught a whole class on this actually, which is like clients come to IDEO and they ask us a question and they say, we want help with this. And one of the things that I learned about IDEO is that like never take the client at what they say, and it's not I don't mean to be condescending because our clients are like brilliant people, but it's like it's oftentimes hard to know for a client to know what they want. And I think one of the superpowers of IDEO was to say like, is that really the question that you want to ask? And so oftentimes what we would do is we would just talk to them and listen. And I would often play little games, like we'd come up with these little games to play with them to kind of pull out more information. Because once you get them actually talking, then it's like, oh, now you're saying something really, really different. And so often what we would do is we'd say, okay, we hear you, what you're asking for, and then we would kind of to each other and kind of like try and figure out what are they really asking for, and then we kind of think we'd figure it out, and then we'd go back to them and we'd say like, how about, I know you asked us this question, but how about this question? Because this kind of seems like more what you're asking. And it's great for a bunch of reasons. One is that oftentimes clients are wrong, and it's not their fault. It's just that they don't know what they want. You know what I mean? And because oftentimes it requires another perspective for them to really know what because they need that extra. That's why they're seeking us out. They're seeking a different perspective, and so they can't have the right perspective. That's what they're missing. And then the other thing is that like we get to reframe it into something that we want to do and that we think is interesting. And it's not selfish. It's actually, I think it's truly oftentimes a better question to ask. And then it's also a test to see like, is this the right, is this a good relationship? Because if they're the kind of client that's like, oh yeah, I'm open to that. I'm open to a different question. And yes, it's right, or no, I'm willing to tell you, no, it's wrong, or you know what I mean, and tell us more. That's the kind of client that we want. We actually want to work with clients that are like open and interesting and having a debate and finding that tension and working with it. And so that's one of the things that I really learned, and I feel like we had really honed at IDEO. And it's something that I take out into the work that I do now. And I think a lot of people, I used to be afraid to do it. Like, I'm not going to tell my client what the question is. Like, of course I wouldn't do that, but actually that's exactly the best thing to do. And it qualifies and it weeds out the relationships that aren't correct, aren't the right ones. And so I would say, how do I know what the right project is if I feel like we can figure it out together and come to something that's mutually really interesting and kind of like mutually like we're both really qualified to do. And then if that's not the case, then it's not the right project. And so it kind of doesn't matter what the project is, and that's why I've worked on such disparate types of projects. The right type of project is the right type of project for the relationship and asking the right questions at the right time with me. And so that's the right project. It's a hard thing to do, and it does take practice.
How about you, William?
Okay, yeah, I have two questions. So first is about, so it looks like you do a lot of different kinds of projects work, right? I like to do that too, but so I think for every designer, like especially by the way, I'm a visiting faculty at the industrial design department.
Oh, great.
So students are, and some faculties also think this way too. They think, okay, so what kind of designer, okay, what kind of work do you want to do in the future? So, okay, maybe it's furniture, maybe it's healthcare. And then say, okay, you should focus your portfolio, on that area.
Mm-hmm.
But I personally don't agree with that. Because I think that doesn't guarantee you to get into that industry. Just having a lot of projects. But another on the other end is if you have like I do. I don't even know how to define. Like people ask, what do you design? I say, okay, it's a hard question. And that becomes, especially for new students, if they do that, they have all kinds of projects. They get filtered out of the job market quite quickly. So what advice would you give them to maybe to find a balance or have a solution? Yeah.
Let me see if I can you move on that.
All right.
So the question would be with all different types of ways that you might be putting together your portfolio. So this is more then how do you make sure that you're not filtering your portfolio too much or curating your portfolio too much to get to be filtered out of jobs that you might be a good fit for? Would that be the question? A good way to state that?
Yeah, I think so.
Like that,
it seemed like you're also saying like there's an overall advice for students, which is like focus. Be like have a clear, articulated focus. Like this is what I do. I do furniture for very specific, right? And I think what I heard you saying is like that's not your jam. That's not actually what you like. You like to have.
My personal.
Yeah. And so there's two different kinds, like there's definitely like people are on a spectrum, like some people are really focused, like I do furniture for offices that are chairs that are, I
guess my question is more like for people who don't have a clear identity in their portfolio, like they have different kinds of work, because companies a lot of times like, let's say they make drills or furniture. They look for portfolios that has that.
Yeah, right.
So,
yep.
I think for experienced designers, it's less of a problem, but for new grads,
Yeah.
if they have all kinds of different projects, it's very hard. They have limited number of projects already.
Right.
So I think that's the question.
So let me try to articulate this. Right. All right. So we work with a lot of students here, and I'm wondering about if you could provide some guidance on students who come right out of school. They're going to have a broad portfolio of different types of ways that they have expressed themselves as designers, because they're trying it out. And what would be your recommendation, for new designers on how it is that they can show kind of that potential breadth and depth, but then not curate it too much that might not get them a position that they may be right for, but they may not know yet that they're right for.
Yeah.
That's a great summary.
Is that a good way? Okay.
It's tough. I mean, I struggle with this myself because I'm one that doesn't really focus. At least I do focus, but it's not on the expression of it. It's on the core of the challenge, right? And that's something that you can't see by looking at the portfolio. And I think that, unfortunately, for people that are hiring someone to do a creative and innovative thing, which is to think a little bit differently, that's a different type of person than the person who gets hired for expertise, right? So, in a lot of companies, I think the default is they hire for expertise. Like, I want to do this thing, so if I see that you've done this thing before, then I want to hire you. And that's hiring for expertise. The problem is that when companies are hiring for innovation, or for creativity, or for the newness, they default on this muscle memory of I'm hiring for expertise, because first show me that you've done it, and then, but the thing is, if they're asking you to do something new, then that's the wrong way to. So what I would say to students, though, kind of either way, and this is something that I'm actually doing myself, is that it's sort of like what we were talking about, when there's ambiguity, meaning I can go in 180 or maybe even 360 different directions, and I don't know which one I'm going to go in. What we were saying was, pick a direction and just go. If you need to roll a dice or just come up with some other random way, this is what makes a great game, right? Chance. And so take a chance and go in a direction, and it doesn't have to be right. And of course, sometimes I will definitely change my portfolio and change every single time I put it out there. And I will kind of if I'm kind of vibing that they're looking for someone that's has the expertise, they want to see that I've done it before. First of all, that's not really the kind of projects that I actually like. So I've just learned myself, that's already a little bit of a red flag for me, right? But even I do this sometimes. I tailor something, and I'm just going to be I'm going to put a stake in the ground, and for now, for right this moment, in this portfolio, and for this client, or for this whatever job opportunity, I'm just going to make it look really focused, I do this one thing. And if I feel comfortable doing that, when I see it all come together, then I'm okay, yeah, I'm not an imposter, I can do that, and that looks good. And that's a good way to go. Might have to do that a few times, right? That's the thing about ambiguity. It's if there's 360 degrees to go in, and you pick one, you're probably gonna have to pick a few before you hit the right one, right? But it doesn't hurt to be really focused, because I think in general, especially when you're starting out, companies want that kind of focus, and you're either going to have it, they're going to either see it that you have it or that you don't. And then over time, my portfolio, what I really love is when someone looks at it and they kind of get my portfolio, and they're none of this makes sense, but I'm now starting to make sense of it in a way. And I'm okay, cool, then we should definitely work together. And so it's a little bit of a trying to figure qualify. It's also that filtering thing. Is this the kind of client that I want to work with? Is this the kind of job that I really, really want? If it's super focused or not, and it's good to try it.
Yep.
But focus tends to be what the market wants, and so I think that's always a good one to go. And it kind of doesn't matter if you're just or if you're just throw the dart at the wall. I remember once when I was bidding out a project when I was working in film, I spent days working on this bid for this really complicated, and I had gone down all the blind alleys and thought about well, what if this happens, and what if that happens, and what if it rains, and what if and I told my supervisor, I was my boss, I was I had thought through everything that could go wrong, and I think this is really solid. And he's awesome, then let's do it. I'm wait, what? And he's like, Dav, you can get to the bid that you did in one of two ways. You can go down every possibility and then for days and then come back and feel really solid, or you can just grab a dart and throw it at the wall and be that's the number. And both are equally as likely to be the correct answer. And so he's if you want to do that, you could do that. I just throw the dart at the wall, and that works just as well. And so it comes up to you. And so anyway, I think that there's like, it's that chance thing. You know what I mean?
It's like right place, right time. I mean, there's so many things that are, so many factors you just never know.
Yeah,
You know,
and in the end, it's a balance of those, and it just kind of feels right, like what the right balance is, or, yeah.
Yeah. So my second.
You get a second question.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yes.
So my background, I first started as an industrial designer. I went to a very traditional program in Rochester, New York. It's all about like hands-on making things, and so a lot of so the agency is on the designer. But the second school I went to, which is the Institute of Design at IIT in Chicago, it's all about the design process, theory, frameworks. But I remember very clearly because at the 85th anniversary of the school, so there was a very famous design figure, Patrick Whitney. He came back from like to do a talk, and we also invited, I think it was the dean or president from Hungary. There's a school called MOME. So design school there, and the dean there came. So they kind of had a conversation. At the end, the dean from the Hungarian school, which I forgot his name, but he kind of criticized, which I really appreciate, because not many people dare to criticize in public, right? He criticized IDEO, not like Institute of Design, saying, okay, you shouldn't go too far into framework or methods, because the goal of frameworks and methods is to generalize things, right? To generalize things and to teach, to generalize design and teach them to non-designers as like what we call design thinking, right? And then his argument is design thinking is, you can't expect anybody to learn design thinking, get a bunch of frameworks and just know how to do design, right? We still have, there's a lot of agency within each individual designers, and he said their way of doing design is still a lot, very, very rooted in like almost like an art and craft. I guess my question is, I have a feeling you are more on the other side, like more individual side, but would you like, let's say, you mentioned you taught before, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you're teaching, do you like come up with theories, patterns, frameworks from your experience to teach students, or do you just let them learn by doing things?
Let me answer the question. Learn by doing. Okay, so you mentioned earlier that you have taught some classes, and interested about your approach there. So do you come up with, do you utilize like theories and frameworks and a lot of what the design thinking can be baked in, or do you let kind of people sort of find their way and kind of build up their own intuition? Yeah.
Well, I think of this this old saying, adage, whatever. There's 3 steps. The first step is learn the rules. Second step is to follow the rules, and the third step is break the rules, right? So I would say both. Like, I love process, I love frameworks, and they get really heavy and distracting, and they can muddle and kind of like smother I think what you were saying, which is like the individual, authentic, creative spirit that's just kind of like free. Yeah. But like, I think there's a tension obviously between those two, right? The structured process and the individual artist, that just kind of breaks the rules or whatever. And so I really think it's like a little bit of both. And I think that's how I teach how I approach teaching classes, is really like creating some structure, but knowing that like it's going to be broken. But like, I think the question is like when and why and by whom and for what reason. And I think that that's actually the important part of it, is like, it's not about just breaking the rules because you got through the first 2 steps. Like, you can break the rules right away if it's the right thing to do, you know what I mean? Even before kind of learning and following the rules. And it really just depends. And so I think the thing is, it's sort of like, music or art or dance or like jazz or improv, right? like that kind of yes and kind of moment where it's like, let's follow this thing where it goes. And I'm like, stumble upon is one of my guiding approaches to life, which is like what we were saying, like go in a direction and stumble upon the thing that I didn't know that I was looking for. And sometimes that's like breaking the rule, or that's like a new framework or whatever. And in fact, this thing that I'm doing, that I was just telling you about, this organizational work that I'm kind of inventing this whole new thing, it was for an organization that's like really trying to change, and they've sort of like gotten to the edges of the playbooks. They're super advanced, and there's really like there's nothing in the books from Harvard Business Review, whatever, that can help them exactly, because they're like sort of at the edges. And what was I going to say? So they've got all these like frameworks stacked up, and it's like, how do we take all this and make it more like, get it into our bodies and get it more accessible and make it more like muscle memory and gut level, and at the same time have that structure and have that deep wisdom to it that's like grounded in, you know, wisdom and experience. And I think it's just always a combination of the two. But I did find this, I have this like hypothesis about how to do that, and it's of course through character. Because people can embody that. Like you mentioned this guy who came from Hungary, right?
Yeah.
Who was like taking a stand and was acknowledging the history of and the process, but also kind of pushing against it. And he had a certain orientation, and it's sort of like, can you challenge that guy, or challenge this other leader, or challenge in different moments? There's like the people that can teach us how to break the rules, and there's the people that can teach us how to like follow the rules and have structure and have reason. And you can kind of like shift between the different kind of characters and approaches, and see who's the right moment, who's the right character for the moment, you know, and then kind of channel them and maybe get an answer there. Yeah. That's how I do it.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm sure you do really well in a classroom because you're so engaging. I can imagine the students are like into it.
I love teaching. I really like, the only reason I ever teach is I teach so that I learn. I mean, I even feel weird calling it teaching, because I'm actually just secretly just trying to learn, you know, and I'm kind of faking teaching so that I can learn.
Emily, do you have any questions you think that we should be asking that didn't come across? And
She has another.
oh, you have another question. Great.
Yay.
I have a sort of question. It's not really a podcast, but like I've just been taking notes. I have to go in a few minutes, but I was just wondering if like it would be possible to talk later on, like, you know, off like a podcast. Like,
When you can ask the dumb questions.
you talk about like immersive experience design at the Exploratorium, I think, in San Francisco. And I'm actually from San Francisco, so I've like, gone to like the Exploratorium and things like that. So I would love to hear more.
Totally,
about, what you do there, things like that. If there's like a good way to connect, if you have like the availability.
Totally. And I always tell people, if I don't respond, like I fail at email all the time, and if I don't respond to someone that I know, it's not because I don't want to, it's because I didn't get it, or it just like went through. I'm terrible at that kind of stuff. But totally, let's connect. I'd love to.
And when we're done recording, you'll have time to chat too.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Awesome.
Thank you.
I really
it was super
appreciate
fun.
it. Yeah, it was
Always
good.
fun.
It's good. I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Come to Champaign. Come teach here.
All right, I will. Tomorrow.
That's true. It's true. Cool.
Or Wednesday. All right.
All right.
Yay! And
I'm not
scene.
Haley, so
It's a wrap.
Awesome.
That was fun.
Thanks, you guys. Thanks for coming.
She had to check out early. She did tell me.
That's fun, man.
Yeah, totally.